Perfect, so we're going to have a quick chat here about how you take your organization and you plan to implement DevOps. What are the things you need to worry about? What are the things you need to be strategic about? How do you take the top-down view of things and really make sense of what DevOps looks like in your organization? So we're going to start here and really just kind of drill into some basics. I want to give you a really high-level, basic starting point. So, a little bit about this, about me. I'm a software architect. I've been doing DevOps for a while, whatever you call it, operations, engineering, build engineering. Our point here is that I've been in this space a bit. I love to write software, and at this point, I'm working with Datapipe. I'm the director of automation and DevOps, and we're here to really do some awesome things for our clients. Looking at what our plan here is, I'm going to spend some time and really just kind of walk you through how I approach this with our consulting clients. The net new thing here is that everybody thinks this is a new world, but ultimately we're talking about the same practices and principles that we've been dealing with all along in technology. And how's this going to work? I'm just going to tell it to you straight. There's no need for me to sugarcoat it. I'm going to tell you the stories of how we dealt with this with our clients, and obviously we're going to kind of move on. So. Every organization is looking for DevOps, and whatever they call DevOps, whatever they believe it is, they're chasing the dream. They're looking for the nirvana of operations engineering and automation that meets some interesting idea for them at some point, but really, there's two things that you care about in automation, and two reasons why you start looking at cloud. You take the cost aspect of it, and you say, well, I'm going to go to cloud to save cost. I'm going to try to engineer my environment such that it costs less and that it's more efficient, and that's great, because you can do that. But the other side of this that a lot of businesses forget or don't get to is planning for agility. How do I leverage this new capability, this faster cycle, so that I can actually go do more business with more people, present new features, new tool sets, new components to my customers who are asking me for more? And how do I compete against those startups that are starting to eat my lunch? So here's the other thing. Everyone has a test problem, no matter who you are. Everyone has a problem with test. Everyone really struggles with the idea of a complete test suite, a complete test process, and you have to build it in from the start, but cloud and the idea of automated deployment, automated management, DevOps, if you will, it gives you the capability of repeated deployment such that you can test on representative systems, that you can do it often, do it all the time, every release, every push, and that really only comes from the practices that we're going to talk about here today. So we'll zoom back out here and kind of look at cloud platforms. What's the point? We got to make sense of how we're going to build the foundation that we're going to lay all this on. And none of what we're going to talk about, again, is really all that foundationally different. It's how we focus on it. And I'm going to be sort of a jerk here. We're going to look at it in a real specific order. We're going to look at what our principles are, what our practices are, and then how we go implement them in between. And really honestly, change is hard. This isn't something you get to today, tomorrow, or next week. This is something that takes time, and we're talking about strategy because at the end of the day, it takes time and a strategy and a map to get there. So, what's the first piece? Let's talk about infrastructure automation. You got to be able to put it up and put instances, put machines in place to go put your applications on them. And doing so in a repeatable pattern, in a repeatable template, in a way that gets you to that ability to test, that ability to cycle quickly is really critical, but why are we going to bother? That's really the question that you got to start with. What are the principles here? Why are we doing this? We're going to go after this such that we can repeat this over and over and over again, relentlessly. We want to make sure that every piece of this is consistent, that we're iterating on it quickly, we design and test every cycle, every time, and test your infrastructure deploys. And it's not a typo that I put it there twice. It's hard, it requires different tools, but take the same practices you take in your software and put it in your infrastructure. So what's the pattern, right? How do I take that really lofty goal and that really great idea and put it into patterns my teams can implement? Well, object-oriented programming is going to be a good sort of framework to look at, and encapsulating your infrastructure so that they're components that you redeploy in bite-sized pieces that you can also test in bite-sized pieces, is really the starting point. And then you parameterize it, you build to interfaces if you're a SOA person, and you really look to design by contract. So each piece has a consistent contract inside of your infrastructure that's well known and well followed. So what do you do for this for tooling? Tooling's easy. You can look around the expo, you can see who's got new tools, who's got new things, CloudFormation, Terraform, Chef provisioning, tons of tools out there to do this. Not one of them is right or wrong. It just matters on what fits for your organization. And that's one of those things that is a fit for purpose discussion. Certainly happy to get into that with questions. So next, what about configuration management? So I've got instances, awesome. Let's go through the same process. Let's look at what we're going to really aim for here. What are our principles? We're going to automate everything. That's everything from test to deploy, to run, to manage. And again, test this stuff often, use the tooling, use the frameworks, use the ecosystem so that you have the ability to reliably deploy this stuff time and time again. And one of the things that I think people miss often is that developers need a representative version of production. Developers have to be able to take what's in production and run it locally so that they don't mess it up. They don't screw up what's in production because they made an assumption of something that was or wasn't there. They didn't make an assumption about a configuration value that was set one way or another. So what's the pattern? Again, clearly delineate those boundaries, build an encapsulated design for your configuration management, and look at whether you're going to use images or OS level runtime configuration. Again, good boundaries to set. You need to make a decision one way or another. For most infrastructure, I really do look to bake as much into those images so we're deploying consistent binary packages as a whole piece, but there's plenty of software that doesn't support that. So you've got to really find those boundaries and define them at every level of your configuration process. Who do you go to find out more about this? Honestly, there's tons of tools out there, from image management, development. Packer is a great tool from HashiCorp. You get tools like Chef, Puppet, Ansible. They're all great. They all follow great patterns. We do a lot of work with Chef, and I really like, what I really like about Chef is the opportunity to use tools like Test Kitchen, so I can bring all of my tests to my developer's workstation, and then move that into a production environment. But obviously, great ways to go about this, a number of different tools to approach, but it's not about the tool. You can get any tool. Tools change every day, tools change every week. And what we really want to do is focus on the outcome we want to hit for our technical teams and back that into the tools that we work with. So here's where things get weird. I work for an infrastructure company. We deploy servers. And frankly, I shouldn't be talking about this in a lot of ways, but really the application is what matters. Nobody cares that a server's running. What they care about is that an application runs and it meets its SLAs. So what we need to do is really start talking application health instead of server health. And to do that, we need to understand how the application is designed and deployed. What do we need to do? Look at this thing and figure out how we're going to use a given platform's tools, how we're going to leverage the platform underneath it to deploy it properly. And a little tweak here, developers need to be responsible for their code. Just like as ops people, we'll get up in the middle of the night and support a system, developers need to know that when they push a bad release, and this is a cultural thing, when they push a bad release, they're on the hook for it. And you put that in your organization, a couple of bad sev ones, a couple of bad problems, and frankly, things get really interesting in terms of how much tests you get injected into your code. So what's the pattern here? You need to have teams that serve developers. You need to have a team that serves developers and gives them the tools to be successful. At the same time, developers need to implement the contracts that those teams give them. So, an example, we need to provide a consistent logging tool set, and if we do that, teams need to acquiesce to that unless it doesn't fit. We need to, instead of look at governance and heavy-handed governance strategies, find ways to automate and make the path to do the right thing easier and easier. And here, we look at things like the relationships between teams, and I have a degree in psychology, and I could tell you that it's touchy-feely, but frankly, teams need to work by contract, just like software does. What do we do here? I'm not going to talk about tools because the list could be miles long, but look at logging, look at performance management, look at things like configuration management, service discovery, look at other common tools that we can inject into the application workspace, and then find ways to serve those devs as customers. You need that platform engineering team, and I mean engineering team, to serve those needs and move that forward. Finally, this is where everyone likes to start, but I'm going to end with it. Looking at the architectural principles, looking at the patterns and how we build from top down instead of just looking from side to side. And again, I'm going to reinforce this time and time again, but we need to treat developers as customers. We need to have a relationship between ops or platform engineering and developers that treats them as customers and their end users. For our purposes, what we really care about for developers, if a developer is my customer, I care about deployment velocity. I care about their ability to take code from here to deployed as fast as possible. So if that's my goal, if that's their need, then how much automation do I inject? A ton. Everything that I can do to automate that changes. And one of the things that helps with that is to help open up the ecosystem internally. the idea of using social coding patterns, if you go to GitHub, if I need a solution to an open source project, I fork the project, I write it, I put it back in, and I put a pull request into the project owner to say, hey, here's the solution. I found it, I fixed it, here it is. And that means that the platform engineering team, the service teams, don't need to solve all the problems. And if I have a priority that I need solved in your service, and you're not going to prioritize it, I'm going to go fix that myself, merge it into your code with your permission, and release it through that process. And when we have the same type of social standard around that, it becomes a lot easier. Again, patterns, one of the things that really gets me about these types of systems is the openness. So we need to embrace openness, put documentation out there in the real world, give developers all the docs. API discovery is great at a programmatic level, but how do I know that that team over there wrote the service that I need already? And getting that stuff down into your organization is really critical in a pattern you have to establish from team to team. On top of that, you've got to you've got to automate, again, work with teams to understand those gaps and not blame them for non-compliance. So if a team decides to go do something different, it's not their fault. Well, it probably is. But the point is, it's a miss in the product that you're offering to your customer. So it's not a thing you need to tell them to go undo, but it's a need you need to put into your platform. And that list is going to be customer driven from day one. Finally, you've got to have a product manager. You need to have someone who can go to your customers and work with them to backlog, to prioritize, to get input so that you can build the things that they need to support application longevity and application performance. Tooling, there's a ton of stuff out there. Everything from task management tools to wikis to source code repositories. There's too many to list. Again, but look at your team, figure out how to implement and integrate them into this world. All right, so let's pull it all together. Again, a couple of things that you can specifically do early and often. Looking at a couple of very specific customer problems, we've had customers who look at automation as the solution to all things, and it does solve a lot of problems, but it depends on what level of depth you get to. Don't just stop at automating deployment. Automate the creation of projects, automate the creation of commons, automate the inclusion of all the good stuff that you've developed for your teams so that they don't have to worry about it. Automate service discovery so that when I need to hook up to a service, it's good to go. So one way to actually go try this and prove it out in an organization that maybe not ready for it is to go do a proof of concept. We had a customer who took their entire consumer services division, put them in a room for 90 days, and 90 days later they actually had hit parity with their feature set of a solution that had been around for 5 years. It's amazing that how quickly when you bring a couple of people out of the organization and tell them to focus on a very specific component, that things cycle very, very quickly. So here's another one. There's been a divide between development and operations for years, and it's just getting worse. So how do you fix that? Well, build cross-functional working teams. Get teams cross-pollinated so that in a product team there's a handful of developers, a handful of operations people, and get them to work on the same problems. Teams have to have the business's view of the world at heart, and in the real world, those teams, when they're divided, they do have the best interest at heart, but their interpretation might not be the same, and when they're in the same place, they can share that interpretation and move forward. So give it a try. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's something that in our client base, we spend a lot of time consulting with how to merge and manage those relationships, but it's a really powerful test and a really great way to show business teams that you can cycle faster, you can bring the process together, because at the end of the day, it's delivering a service, delivering an application, not just delivering hardware. And finally, how do you deal with legacy applications? This is the biggest problem that most organizations have. We've gone through a cycle where we've bought a lot of commercial software. Problem is that they're all GUI-based installs, they're all GUI-based management tools, and there are ways to fix this. A lot of vendors are starting to actually modernize and provide recipes, provide tools, provide tactics to go install and manage them for you. And if they don't, maybe it's time to find another vendor. Maybe it's time to write one yourself. But look for your vendors to help you with this. A great example, I know AlertLogic recently released a number of chef recipes to manage their tooling. Something that they provide to their customers so that you don't have to worry about it. So what's the point? Right, tools are great. patterns are great, but it's about the people. You got to get them to work together. It's just, at the end of the day, that's the reality. You want to enable people to use the right tools, but at their heart, engineers are curious people. They want to solve problems, and giving them cool problems to solve generally kicks that off. And it's a journey, not a destination. You're not going to get there tomorrow. It's not going to happen overnight. And frankly, we're at a point now where you're going to have to walk this out in your organization. It's a maturity path, not a point down the road on a map specifically that you're going to hit. And you got to think about this. Tooling's great, and everybody likes to acquiesce to it because it's easy to talk about. You want to leverage these tools. You want to use what's out there, so you don't have to do all the heavy lifting. All of Werner Vogel's point, get rid of all your heavy, or all of your undifferentiated heavy lifting. But don't let your tools dictate how your business runs. You need to know what your business needs are first, and then go into your tooling decisions. I'm just like everyone else. I like a good tooling debate. I like to debate whether Chef, Puppet, Ansible is the right thing, whether I'm going to use this tool or that tool, Jira or another issue tracker, but frankly it doesn't matter. It's good to know the tools, but we need to know why we're using them. And again, you got to go down the road yourself. You got to take your organization through that process, and for what we need to do, unless you're a net new company and you can just start this way today, you need to build that maturity and the training. Really the journey to get there is all about the people and all about your plan to get them there. So that's the strategy. That's the basic point. It's really something that organizations are struggling with today that we look to help them enable, and frankly that's why we have a professional services organization. So if you have any questions, happy to answer them, and obviously thank you for being here.